When he landed on the freeway here, I thought maybe, well, he might make it, and then he went over there and it's just a giant flame.
Flying into variable weather, Delta Airlines Flight 191 would experience something 3 veteran pilots had never seen before. Flying the aircraft dangerously close to the farmland below, the 100-plus passengers on board didn't know this flight would be their last. But what caused Flight 191 to lose control and plummet to the ground? Today we will uncover what happened before, during, and after that tragic flight. On August 2, 1985, Delta Airlines Flight 191 was a scheduled domestic passenger flight between Fort Lauderdale International Airport and Los Angeles International Airport. There was, however, an intermediate planned stop at the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Being a route that occurs daily, it was as routine as it could be. The aircraft in use that day was a 6-year-old Lockheed model and had been delivered to Delta Airlines soon after its production. Having run continuously since that date, it had over 20,000 flight hours and over 11,000 takeoffs and landings. The crew on the ill-fated flight consisted of 3 pilots. The 57-year-old captain, Ted Connors Jr., had a clean record and was known by crew members in the industry to take exceedingly safe routes around storms. The captain had logged 29,000 flight hours, with over 3,000 of those hours being in this exact Lockheed model. The 2 other pilots on board were First Officer Rudy Price Jr. and Flight Engineer Nick Nasick. Both pilots had over 6,000 flight hours, and from all accounts taken after the accident, the crew was known for being both professional and experienced pilots. Before taking off at 2:10 p.m., the pilots read the weather report for the Dallas area. The DFW Airport Terminal weather forecast showed a possibility of widely scattered rain showers and thunderstorms becoming isolated at around 8 p.m. While takeoff was on time at 3 p.m., Flight 191 quickly gained altitude and headed for Dallas. As the aircraft passed over northern New Orleans, the cockpit received a dispatch alert stating that the weather was intensifying along the Texas-Louisiana border. This encouraged the flight to redirect to a more northern approach into DFW. At 5:35 p.m., the crew received an ATIS broadcast for weather at DFW, and 12 minutes later, the Fort Worth controller cleared the flight down to 10,000 feet. The controller suggested they fly at a heading of 250 degrees towards the Blue Ridge approach. Captain Connors replied that the route would take them right through the storm cell, stating, "I'd rather not go through it at all, and I'd rather go around it one way or the other." After a brief exchange, the controller gave the flight a new heading and cleared the flight direct to Blue Ridge, instructing the flight crew to descend another 1,000 feet. After a handful of exchanges with the air traffic control, Flight 191 descended several more 1,000 feet and prepared the cabin for landing. After clearing the flight to land on runway 17C, Flight 191 was told to descend another 3,000 feet. Half a minute later, the approach controller told them to reduce their speed as they were getting some variable winds due to the storm. 3 miles ahead, a Learjet 25 on the same approach encountered turbulence and a loss of visibility, but was able to continue its approach and land safely. After the Learjet had landed and before visibly seeing Flight 191, the controller saw lightning from the storm cell. Later findings saw that the storm upgraded from a VIP Level 1 to a VIP Level 4. 30 seconds later, Flight 191 was told to reduce their speed before handing the flight to the controller in the tower. 12 seconds later, Captain Connor radioed the tower to say, "Tower, Delta 191 Heavy, out here in the rain, feels good, seeing lightning." The crew on board and the controllers on the ground were unaware that a microburst with a 2.1 mile diameter was centered 2 miles before the north side approach Flight 191 was taking. This confusing weather pattern is a disaster for planes to fly through, as the extreme downdraft and updraft wind speeds set the plane for a dangerous ride. The unknowing crew lowered the landing gear and extended the flaps for landing. At 6:04 p.m., First Hand Officer Price said, "Lightning coming out of that one, right ahead of us." Now at an altitude of 1,000 feet, the captain told Price to monitor his airspeed as a cockpit voice recorder captured what sounded like rain hitting the aircraft. The captain warned Price, "You're gonna lose it," saying further, "Push it up, push it way up." The cockpit voice recorder then captured the sound of revving engines and Connor saying, "That's it, hang on to the son of a bitch." From this point on, the aircraft began to sink below its glide path and at more than 50 feet per second. Connors is then heard saying, "Toga," which is aviation shorthand for the order to apply maximum thrust and to abort a landing by going around and trying the landing again. Price responded by pulling the nose up, but it failed to stop the aircraft's descent. Seconds later, the landing gear made contact with the ground in a plowed field 6,336 feet short of the runway, and rolled at a high speed across the farmlands as it approached Texas State Highway 114. The aircraft struck a light pole and the left engine hit a Toyota Celica, killing the 28-year-old driver immediately. While still moving, the plane hit more light poles before fragmenting and crashing into 2 water tanks. Now on fire, the aircraft came to a rest on its left side, and within minutes, all airport fire and rescue teams were dispatched. Despite the high gusts of wind, they had the fire under control within 10 minutes of responding, mostly thanks to the rain that suddenly rolled in. Of the passengers and crew, 8 crew members and 134 passengers died, while 26 survived, with a few being completely uninjured. Most survivors were sitting in the rear economy smoking section, which had separated from the fuselage after hitting the water tanks. Surviving passengers reported that the fire began entering the cabin through the left wall while the plane was still moving, and a survivor stated that he watched passengers attempt to escape the fire by unbuckling their seatbelts and trying to flee. Following a lengthy investigation into the crash, the National Transportation Safety Board determined that pilot error was to blame, saying, "The flight crew's decision to initiate and continue an approach into a cloud which they observed to contain visible lightning resulted in the aircraft's encounter with a low-altitude microburst. The captain's decision to continue the approach beneath the thunderstorm did not comply with the airline's weather avoidance procedures. However, the avoidance procedures did not specifically address thunderstorm avoidance in the airport terminal area." The Delta Flight 191 crash resulted in the longest aviation trial in American history. Lasting 14 months from 1988 to 1989, the trial featured the first use of computer graphic animation as evidence in a federal courtroom, which is now routine in courtrooms across the country. The court found that both the government personnel and the Delta flight crew were negligent, but that Delta was ultimately responsible because its pilots were the proximate cause of the accident, and after several court appeal reversals, the decision stands to this day. While this tragedy comes down to human error, this was a rare mistake made by the pilots according to today's standards. These days, flying with instrument guidance when visibility is at 0 is really common and shouldn't be a thing to be worried about, as every pilot is trained to take off and land in these conditions. The ability to do this truly shows how far the aviation industry has come. Following Flight 191's crash, the Federal Aviation Administration began requiring all commercial planes to have the capability to detect low-level wind shear, which would have indicated the microburst miles before the plane entered it. Several years after the crash, new terminal Doppler weather radars were placed at the airports with a high microburst risk. These radars provide a greater lead time for microbursts and low-level wind shear. This tragedy resulted in the deaths of over 100 individuals. Rest in peace to those who lost their lives that day. That is the story of Delta Airlines Flight 191. If you made it this far, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. And if you want to watch more scary, fascinating videos, make sure to check out the videos right above.